Beneath the quiet hum of the modern world, there are skies that remember. When the night unfolds its velvet curtain and the stars begin their silent performance, something ancient stirs above us. A memory, a whisper from civilizations long gone. Each constellation, each shimmering cluster is not just a map of light, but a story carved across eternity. Long before the first telescope turned upward, long before the hum of cities drowned out the sound of the wind, humankind looked to the heavens for answers. The stars were not distant. They were guides, guardians, storytellers. To the people of the Nile, they foretold the rise and fall of kings. To the tribes of the Andes, they carried the breath of their ancestors. And to the wanderers of the desert, they were a promise that even in the vast emptiness, something divine was watching. You can almost feel that same connection now, can't you? The world slowing, the air cooling, the sound of your heartbeat syncing with the rhythm of the universe. Somewhere far above, those same stars still burn with the same light that once guided lost travelers through sandstorms, sailors through uncharted seas, and dreamers through the depths of time. It's strange to think. The very light reaching your eyes tonight may have left its source before the pyramids were raised, before the first words of history were written. That means the sky you see is not the present. It's a memory, a living museum of everything that's ever been. As you listen, let your thoughts drift upward. Imagine a time when the earth was still a mystery and the heavens the only map. The ancients didn't just gaze at the stars. They read them. To them, Orion wasn't just a hunter. He was a warning. Sirius wasn't just the brightest star. It was the pulse of the gods. The Pleiades weren't distant suns. They were sisters watching over humankind. Every civilization that ever rose and fell carved their faith into the night sky. The Maya tracked the turning of the heavens with a precision we still struggle to understand. The Egyptians built monuments aligned perfectly with the stars, as though to reach for them in stone. The Sumerians, in their clay tablets, recorded lights that moved differently, objects they called visitors of the sky. Perhaps they were only planets, or perhaps they saw something more. If you close your eyes, you can almost see them. Ancient astronomers standing atop their temples, torches flickering, their eyes reflecting the starlight. They watch patterns shift, new lights appear where none should be. They didn't have science to explain it, only wonder. And sometimes wonder was more powerful than knowledge. The stars didn't just guide them. They shaped their destiny. Wars were started, crops were planted, temples were built, all by the rhythm of the heavens. They believed the gods spoke through starlight, and perhaps they weren't wrong. Now, as the world sleeps, those same lights still whisper across the cosmos. They carry stories no telescope can measure, no equation can explain. They remind us that the sky above us isn't just empty space. It's the oldest book we've ever read. And somewhere in those endless pages, something waits. Something that once guided civilizations and may one day guide us again. So breathe deeply. Let the darkness settle around you. Let the stars tell their story. Because tonight we travel back to the ancient skies. Somewhere in the quiet cradle of the past, before ink and paper, before telescopes and charts, there were maps written in starlight. The ancients did not draw them on parchment or carve them into stone. They memorized them, breathed them, lived by them. The heavens were their compass, their calendar, their gospel. When the night fell over the Nile, priests climbed the steps of tall temples, eyes fixed on the same constellations that now hover over your window. To them, each star had a place, each flicker a meaning. They watched for alignments that foretold floods, omens, or the favor of gods. When Sirius rose at dawn, they knew the Nile would soon swell, and they called it the terror of Isis, weeping for her lost love. Thousands of miles away, the Maya were doing the same beneath a different sky. In the jungles of the Yucatan, they built pyramids that reached upward like stone prayers. The temple of Kukulkan wasn't just a monument, it was a calendar. Twice a year, when the light struck its steps just right, a shadow serpent slithered down the stone, a divine illusion of the god returning from the stars. The night sky connected civilizations that never met, whispering the same truths in different tongues. The Navajo saw the Milky Way as a trail of holy pollen, scattered by creation itself. The Chinese mapped the heavens with delicate precision, naming every visible star, every pattern. Seeing the emperor's throne reflected in the pole star, the cosmic heart around which everything revolved. To look at the stars was to look at power, divine, cosmic, eternal. And yet not every light in those ancient skies fit the map. Records from Mesopotamia speak of wandering fires that moved against the fixed patterns, luminous visitors that descended and vanished. In clay tablets buried beneath centuries of dust, scribes describe them not as omens, but as messengers. The gods have descended, one translation reads. Their chariots burn brighter than the sun. Were these comets, planets, or something far more mysterious? Perhaps they were the same sky beings spoken of by the Dogon people of West Africa, who somehow knew of Sirius B, a faint white dwarf invisible to the naked eye, long before modern astronomy confirmed its existence. How could they know? They said it was knowledge given to them by beings who came from that very star. The forgotten maps of heaven, it seems, were not just tools of navigation. They were messages, coordinates left for the faithful, the curious, the dreamers, lines drawn across the sky, waiting for someone to trace them again. Imagine standing in the desert thousands of years ago, the air cool and clean, the stars so sharp they cast shadows. The ancients stood there too, whispering prayers, building monuments, aligning them perfectly with the stars above. The Great Pyramid of Giza, for instance, points directly to Orion's belt. Teotihuacan's layout mirrors the Pleiades. The stones of Machu Picchu seem to echo the motion of the sun itself. It's as if every ancient builder was trying to recreate the heavens on earth, to make the ground reflect the sky. And maybe they weren't simply honoring the stars, but calling something back from them. There are stories, faint, half-remembered, of voices that came from the dark, civilizations that rose too suddenly, technologies too advanced for their time, stone blocks so precise that even modern tools can't replicate their fit. Were these gifts from forgotten gods, or visitors from worlds we still can't see? The night keeps its secrets well, but if you listen closely, to the wind, to the pulse of the earth, to the silence between the stars, you can almost hear what the ancients once did. The same gentle hum of eternity, the same sense that something vast, intelligent, and eternal watches from the void. Those maps weren't forgotten by accident. They were hidden, waiting for us to look up again. So as you drift deeper into the calm of night, remember, you are surrounded by the same constellations that guided kings, priests, and travelers. The same light that once touched their faces now touches yours. The sky has not changed. Only our understanding has. And somewhere above or beyond, those forgotten maps still glow, waiting for someone to remember the way. There comes a moment in every civilization's memory when the sky changes, not slowly, not with the rhythm of seasons, but suddenly, unnaturally. It began, as the old chronicles whisper, with a single night of trembling stars. In the high deserts of Egypt, priests gathered on the temple terraces to read the heavens. But the constellations were not where they should have been. The belt of Orion seemed to shimmer, as though bending, warping, moving. The brightest of them pulsed red, then white, then red again, as if alive. The sacred calendar no longer matched the sky, and the rituals of centuries suddenly made no sense. Half a world away, in the jungles of Central America, the Maya watched the same shift. The great serpent of light, what we now call the Milky Way, appeared to twist in on itself, its spine flickering like a broken flame. For them, it was not an astronomical event. It was a warning. The Popol Vuh speaks of it still. The gods withdrew their light, and the Yui sky became uncertain. The night no longer comforted, it threatened. Sailors at sea told of strange new lights rising and falling where no stars belonged, red spheres that drifted across the horizon, then vanished into black water. Shepherds in the mountains woke to a low hum in the air. Not wind, not thunder, but something deeper, resonating through stone and bone alike. And then came the silence. For days, no stars appeared at all. A haze blanketed the sky, and the moon vanished. The ancients believed the gods had turned their faces away. Fires burned through the night as people prayed for dawn, uncertain whether it would ever come. When the clouds finally broke, the heavens above were not the same. Certain stars had changed their positions. Some constellations seemed dimmer. The patterns, the sacred alignments, no longer matched the monuments built to honor them. What had happened? Modern astronomers might call it an atmospheric event, a comet, or a supernova glimpsed through smoke. But the ancients knew nothing of physics. To them, the sky was alive, and it had spoken. Across continents, sacred traditions shifted. Temples were rebuilt to match new patterns. Ceremonies changed. Even language itself began to bend around this celestial upheaval. The Maya adjusted their calendars. The Egyptians altered their prayers. The priests of Sumer recalculated their stars. But no explanation satisfied the fear that crept through every culture that watched the heavens flicker. Some called it divine punishment, others a cleansing. But there were those, a few, who saw it differently. Among the Inca, legends tell of a descending light that came when the stars fell out of order. A brilliance that hovered above the Andes and hummed with what they called the breath of creation. The elders said it was not a god, but a messenger, one who came when the heavens realigned. What if this crisis was not chaos, but contact? From the deserts of Arabia to the plateaus of Peru, stories aligned too closely to ignore. Shining discs, pillars of fire, gods descending wrapped in light. Some are etched into stone, identical shapes drawn by hands separated by oceans. The heavens changed, and so did humankind. Our ancestors began to look upward, not with certainty, but with longing. The stars no longer felt like guides, but questions. And in that fear, a new era began. One of myth, worship, and wonder twisted together. The monuments that once faced the stars now stood as monuments to memory. Silent stone witnesses of a time when the cosmos itself seemed to reach down and rearrange the earth. What force could have done it? A shift in the heavens, or something else moving through them? As the narrator's voice fades, the night returns to calm. The same stars that once terrified the ancients now rest peacefully above. Yet the thought lingers, gentle and uneasy. If the sky changed once, could it change again? It began, as all great mysteries do, with a sound too quiet to name. A hum, low, steady, ancient. It seemed to rise not from the earth, but from the stars themselves. In the high Andes, a shepherd tended his flock under a winter sky so clear it felt painted by gods. He had no name for the constellations, only stories. Tales whispered by his elders of the walkers of the heavens. Those who once descended in pillars of light to teach their ancestors the ways of time and harvest. But that night those stories stirred awake. At first he thought it was fire, 3 small embers drifting across the horizon. But they did not flicker. They glided, perfectly aligned, perfectly silent. He rubbed his eyes, thinking it was fatigue. But when he looked again, the lights had drawn closer. They pulsed softly, gold, then white, then a deep, living blue that no flame could ever hold. The air around him grew still, the wind frozen, as though the world itself was listening. Even the animals, his dogs, his llamas, lifted their heads and stood in absolute silence. The shepherd fell to his knees. He remembered the old prayers, words carved into the bones of his language, and whispered them to the sky. The 3 lights moved together, forming a perfect triangle above him. Then one broke away. It descended slowly, pausing just above the ridge. No sound, no heat, just an immense presence. Not frightening, but vast, as if the mountain itself had come alive. In that moment he felt it, a vibration inside his chest, deep and resonant, like the pulse of the earth. The light shimmered, and for the briefest instant, he thought he saw shapes within it. Tall forms moving with the rhythm of breath, almost human, but not quite. And then, the light was gone. No explosion, no smoke, just silence, and the sound of his own heartbeat echoing in the valley. When dawn came, the sky was clear, the stars dimmed, and there, where the light had hovered, lay a perfect circle burned into the frost. The ground was smooth, pressed flat, and warm to the touch despite the cold. He said nothing for days. He told no one. Until one evening, the same lights appeared again, this time over the next valley. And this time, hundreds saw them. The news spread from mountain to mountain, from village to temple. The priests came, wrapped in woven robes, their faces painted with the symbols of the stars. They stood in circles of firelight, watching the sky, chanting the old names of the gods, hoping one would answer. But the lights did not descend again. They drifted together, hovered, and then vanished, swallowed by the heavens as if they had never been. Centuries later, archaeologists would uncover carvings at that very site. 3 circles intertwined, their pattern unmistakably identical to the constellation of Orion's belt. Beneath the carvings, a single phrase repeated in the ancient tongue. They returned as they promised. What had those shepherds seen that night? Beings? Spirits? Or perhaps something far older? Something that watched humanity grow from the moment fire first touched stone. Modern scientists call it coincidence, but those who still live close to the stars in the quiet lands far from cities whisper that the lights never left, that they come only to those who still remember the old stories. And sometimes when the wind is right, the night is still, the mountains hum again, a soft, steady tone that rises from the ground and fades into the stars above. Could it be the same voice that once called to them? Calling still? Words spread across the valleys like wind through tall grass. Every traveler, every herder, every elder carried the same trembling in their voice. A story too strange to doubt, too sacred to question. They had seen lights that moved like thought, like breath, like prayer. The nights that followed were never the same. Fires burned longer. Faces turned upward more often. Children pointed to the sky with fingers dusted in ash, tracing the invisible paths of the star walkers their grandparents had once spoken of. In one small mountain village, they gathered in a wide circle as the stars rose. The elders sat closest to the flames, their weathered hands resting on the earth, as though listening through the soil itself. They believed the ground remembered, that every vibration, every tremor, carried messages from the heavens down into the bones of the world. An old woman, her hair silver like moonlight, lifted her gaze and whispered, "They have not come to frighten us. They have come to remind us." A murmur followed, agreement, fear, reverence, all blending into a single breath shared by many. They began to carve new symbols into stone tablets, triangles, spirals, and 3 perfect circles intertwined. Each mark made not just by hand, but by faith, a quiet hope that whatever they had seen would return again, and that this time they would be ready to understand. Far above, the sky shimmered, not with light, but with memory. Orion's belt stretched across the night like an ancient scar, unchanged, eternal. The people began to call those 3 lights the Rememberers. To them, the heavens were not distant. They were alive, listening. Priests from nearby temples arrived days later, curious yet cautious. They carried scrolls of sky maps, some older than memory, and compared them against the villagers' carvings. The patterns matched, every curve, every line, but something more was hidden in the geometry. Angles so precise they seemed beyond simple chance. Distances measured not in miles, but in meaning. One priest looked up from the parchment, his voice shaking as he spoke. "These are not our symbols. These were here before us." And in that moment, the night seemed to lean closer, as if the cosmos itself were waiting for acknowledgement. The air shimmered faintly, and the villagers swore they saw a soft blue glow pulsing behind the clouds. Faint, rhythmic, like a heartbeat in the sky. But not everyone saw divinity. Some whispered warnings that no light that perfect could belong to the natural world, that perhaps they were being watched, measured, by something that had walked among their ancestors long before language was born. The priests urged calm, reminding them of the old words. Fear closes the eye of the soul. And so they kept watching. For months, no new lights appeared, but the people continued to gather, to chant, to burn incense that drifted into the dark like tiny galaxies of smoke. Each ritual became an act of remembrance, of connection. They built stone circles on high ridges, not to summon, but to listen, to wait. Modern-day explorers would one day find these same stones, each aligned perfectly with the setting of Orion. What those ancient witnesses had started would ripple across centuries, buried in myths, reborn in constellations. And even now, standing in the same valleys beneath the same skies, travelers say they feel it too. That deep, unspoken awareness that something vast once reached out to humanity and may still be reaching. For the people of the mountains, it was never about proof. It was about belonging. The quiet certainty that they were part of a story written not on paper, but across the face of the cosmos. And perhaps if you stood there tonight, among the stones, with nothing but the stars above and the earth beneath your feet, you might feel it too. Because what if they weren't just looking down at us, but waiting for us to look back? Centuries drifted by like sand through unseen fingers. The stories of the mountain lights became legend, their meaning softened by time. But the earth never forgot. Beneath the soil, carved into temple walls and buried in forgotten ruins, the same symbols endured: spirals, circles, triangles pointing skyward. And when the world began to rediscover its past, those old marks started whispering again. It began with a single find: a slab of stone unearthed near the Peruvian highlands. Its surface was worn by rain, but the pattern was unmistakable. 3 concentric circles, each aligned with a constellation, still visible above the same horizon. Archaeologists brushed away the centuries of dust, unsure whether they were looking at art, mathematics, or something older than either. One of them murmured, "It's like a message sent across time." Soon after, discoveries multiplied. In the sands of Egypt, at the base of weathered pyramids, inscriptions depicted figures descending from the sky, surrounded by halos of fire. Their hands reached toward men bowed in reverence, as if exchanging knowledge rather than fear. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets described the lights that moved without sound, guiding the harvest and warning of floods. Each culture spoke in its own tongue, but the language of their symbols was the same: geometry born of stars. The early astronomers of the 1800s became obsessed. They compared temple alignments, plotting coordinates by candlelight, tracing invisible lines across continents. They noticed something unsettling. Many of these ancient structures were aligned not with the stars visible in their own time, but with positions those stars had occupied thousands of years earlier. A sky that no longer existed. It was as though the builders had mapped not the heavens they saw, but the heavens they remembered. A French explorer named Moreau stood atop a wind-blasted plateau in Peru and wrote in his journal, "The temples do not reach for the sky, they follow it, each stone a note in a symphony too vast for us to hear." And then came the stories that science could not record. Whispers carried in expedition diaries, dismissed in public but haunting in private. One archaeologist in 1892, camped near the ruins of Nabta Playa, wrote of seeing orbs of soft white light drifting silently across the dunes. They hovered above the ancient stone alignments, pulsing gently as if studying their own reflection on Earth. By morning, the sand showed no footprints, no marks, no proof at all, except for a deep, magnetic silence that made the compass needles spin. Across the Atlantic, in the dense jungles of Central America, explorers claimed to witness glowing spheres hovering above Mayan temples, always silent, always vanishing when approached. The indigenous guides refused to look directly at them, whispering, "Those are not stars. They are watchers." Even decades later, when the reports reached Europe, the details were eerily consistent. Perfect circles of light, always 3, always aligned as though tied to a single unseen orbit. Modern scholars dismiss the accounts as imagination born from exhaustion, but a few refused to look away. They began cataloging patterns, cross-referencing maps, comparing the light phenomena described in remote locations. The results were troubling. Each site corresponded not only to ancient monuments, but also to specific constellations: Orion, Pleiades, Sirius, the same celestial trio revered since the dawn of civilization. When the first telescopes of the 20th century turned their lenses toward those stars, they found strange anomalies: faint radio pulses, unexplained fluctuations, sources of light that behaved unlike anything natural. Coincidence, perhaps, but the timing and the ancient precision began to erode skepticism. The narration slows, as if whispering a secret across time. Every excavation brought more questions than answers. Every fragment of proof slipped like starlight through human hands. Some scientists began to wonder, not whether the ancients were visited, but whether they themselves were remembering something older. A knowledge passed down not by visitors, but by inheritance. Could the stargazers of the past have carried echoes of a civilization lost far beyond our history? One that once watched the same constellations and left clues scattered in stone? By the 1930s, research teams across continents had begun publishing what they dared to call celestial parallels. Their findings were quieted, buried under the noise of modern progress, but a pattern had emerged. The same shapes carved in Peru appeared in the sands of Egypt. The same temple geometry mirrored in Stonehenge and Angkor. Different hands, same design, as if following a cosmic blueprint. The voice softens, almost reverent now. Every discovery only deepened the mystery. Every answer opened 1,000 more questions. And though centuries of human eyes have searched the heavens for meaning, one truth endures. The stars above the ruins are the same stars we see tonight. Their light may be ancient, but their gaze has never turned away. So what did those lights mean? Were they gods, guides, or simply reminders that the universe remembers us better than we remember ourselves? As decades blurred into centuries, the world changed, but the sky did not. Empires fell, cities rose, and the night lights of humankind began to drown the stars one by one. Yet above the smoke of progress, Orion still hunted across the heavens. The Pleiades still shimmered like a cluster of ancient fires, and Sirius still burned, a steady beacon, just as it had for the shepherds, the kings, and the wanderers who once called it sacred. But while humanity grew louder, the stars grew quieter. By the mid-20th century, the strange reports, those lights that once danced above forgotten ruins, had almost vanished. The age of machines had begun, and people no longer looked up for answers. They looked down, into screens, into science, into certainty. And so, the heavens kept their silence. The watchers, if they ever were, seemed to retreat beyond the reach of our understanding. Yet the stories did not die. In the dusty corners of university libraries and the private collections of quiet men, the mystery endured, fragile and persistent. Journals bound in cracked leather whispered of star visitors. Old reels of black and white film, labeled observation anomalies, showed orbs drifting over jungles and deserts before flickering to white. The handwriting on the boxes often read the same note: no sound, no source, unexplained. Scholars argued endlessly. Some dismissed the accounts as myths reborn, the human tendency to find wonder where reason ends. Others, the dreamers, the ones who could not quite let go of awe, believed there was more to it. They began to see patterns, not in monuments or symbols this time, but in behavior. Every surge of human discovery seemed to coincide with renewed sightings of the lights. When man first mastered stone, they appeared. When man learned to sail by the stars, they appeared. When man sent signals into space, they appeared once more. But then came a long silence, a stillness so vast it felt deliberate. The early astronomers of the modern age, those who once searched for proof with trembling excitement, began to grow weary. Telescopes found no sign of watchers, no message in the void. Satellites circled endlessly, recording data, but none captured the warmth of a mystery. No glowing spheres, no ancient whispers. It was as if the universe had turned its gaze away. And yet some said the silence itself was an answer. What if the watchers had never left? What if they were waiting, as patient as the stars themselves, for humanity to remember the language it once spoke? In the 1950s, a quiet astronomer named Arthur Denham proposed something radical. What if, he said softly during a lecture that few attended, the lights were never visitors at all? What if they were memories? Residual echoes of a time when our ancestors understood the cosmos not as something above them, but as part of them. His theory was ignored, his papers unpublished. Yet decades later, his words would resurface, hauntingly prescient. Meanwhile, explorers and pilots, the rare few who still wandered the edges of the map, began to report things they couldn't explain. A British pilot flying over the Sahara described 3 luminous disks traveling in silent formation beneath his aircraft. A sailor in the Pacific, writing by lantern light, recorded a great glowing cross that drifted through the clouds and dissolved into starlight. None of these accounts made front pages. They were too gentle, too impossible to fit the loud machinery of modern truth. But in whispers, they passed from one generation of believers to the next, and then came the lull. 2 full decades of quiet skies. No sightings, no sounds, not even the faint hum of curiosity. Humanity moved forward, convinced the age of mystery was behind it. But deep in rural valleys, under skies unspoiled by city light, a few still looked up and waited, wondering if the silence was a breath before something returned. The narrator's tone softens further, like the rustle of wind through tall grass. The sky forgets nothing. It watches even when we do not, and sometimes it remembers when we have forgotten. By the late 1970s, it seemed the heavens would remain mute forever, until one summer night in the heart of the English countryside, something stirred again. A farmer woke before dawn to find his fields changed, transformed into vast, perfect circles pressed into the wheat, glistening under the dew like celestial fingerprints. For the first time in centuries, the silence broke, not with a sound, but with a pattern. And once again, all eyes turned upward. Could it be that the same intelligence, the same unseen presence that guided the ancients had returned to remind us that the stars were never truly silent at all?